Previously, we discussed the opening boulder scene from Golden Sun, and deconstructed why, at least in my opinion, the game does an exemplary job at efficiently informing the player about the world and tone, as well as how to play without a traditional tutorial. However, after hearing from some fellow Golden Sun fans, I'd like to dive a little deeper into his introduction, so today we'll be tackling everything that takes place from the title card up to when you take your first steps onto the world map. This includes the introduction of many major characters, up to and including the main villains, as well as the first dungeon of the game. Let's jump right in. So 3 years have passed since the boulder scene we went over in the last video, meaning that what we just witnessed was actually a prologue. We start by following an older Jenna on her walk through the village. She meets Isaac busy fixing the roof from the disaster, and then moves on. You know, the first cool point I would like to give this scene is that it suddenly brings up the idea that fixing a town after a natural disaster can take a very, very long time. Parts of this village were severely damaged, and they're just now getting to a point at which things are back to normal again. Some may argue that 3 years is a little unrealistic, considering that in the real world, natural disasters can take upwards of generations to recover from, but I appreciate that Golden Sun still suggests the concept. Regardless, Jenna continues upwards and meets an older Garrett, who is practicing one of the most common magical abilities you will use in the series, as well as showing off its function. Kinda like how Catch was used in the first few seconds, it's a subtle tutorial. Jenna and Garrett then engage in a conversation that I can only describe as oddly realistic somehow. They talk briefly about the disaster, with Garrett being pretty timid about the subject. There's even a point where they accidentally talk over each other at one point, which I think might be the only time something like this happens in the series. It's hard to describe, but it all comes off as very human to me. After that, they go back down to Isaac and they all talk about their plans for the day. The trio wants to go visit a place called Mount Alph with a scholar named Creighton, the same mountain that the boulder fell from 3 years ago. Apparently the mountain has many ties to alchemy, which is the main source of synergy, basically their fancy name for the magic of the game. So we have a pretty decent motive right off the bat, somewhat of a little trip to a location to learn more about the lore of the world. It especially works as a first dungeon because the player themselves will likely have a lot of questions regarding this topic as well. So they head out to meet the man and... Oh, for crying out loud. Remember that suspicious man and woman who basically one-shot you? Well, they're back, and it looks like they're up to no good again. However, they don't fight you this time. They decide to let you go, with a warning albeit. They also drop their names, Satoros and Minardi. So with that meeting out of the way, you finish your trip to Creighton's cottage. Creighton is probably one of my favorite characters in this series. I think one of the reasons why I like him so much is because he's more diplomatic than your average RPG major character. He's not a fighter, yet he's very powerful in his own sort of way. You talk with him regarding Satoros and Minardi, and they conclude that they must be thieves since they know so much about the mountain despite probably not being allowed inside. They decide to kill two birds with one stone and investigate what they might be up to, as well as explore the place for their own studies. However, before they leave, Creighton runs back to his home and takes 4 silver sacks. These will come into play later. After a short stealth section, which I personally think comes sort of out of nowhere, you make your way to the entrance of the dungeon and enter. You know, I'd like to go a little off topic here. You know what one thing about this game I haven't really praised yet is its color palette. Have you ever noticed that when it comes to architecture in the series, the developers often opt for bright and varying colors that, while it may not be realistic, stand out and make dungeons pop? Heck, they even make the generic forest of the game look interesting using this method. I bring this up now because Mount Alph is a really obvious example of this. You think the dungeon is going to be just some bland brown cave, but then the game suddenly throws these turquoise and pink tiles at you. You enter and then suddenly everything is mold green and gray. There are also rooms in this place that are blue and gold, purple and cream, as well as bright green and brown. It makes it so the dungeon will certainly leave an impression on you, despite its rudimentary design. The next several rooms do a good job of introducing the player to simple mechanics that are plentiful throughout the game, just as jumping from platform to platform and how to use items to solve puzzles. However, in these first rooms, you will likely run into your first real battles of the game, and this is where Golden Sun makes an attempt to teach you a little bit about some of the intricacies of its battle engine. Excluding features you do not have access to yet, there are 2 minor differences Golden Sun tries to teach you in the first few rooms. Firstly, these are the first few battles where you have access to magic. The interesting thing about magic in this game, though, is that it runs off of something I call the epicenter effect. What this means is that magic that targets multiple foes at once will often do more damage to the very enemy you select and less to enemies that surround it. When you think about it, that's actually kind of a brilliant idea that I'm surprised I haven't seen more games do. It causes you to think twice before dishing out high-cost spells. It also works the other way around, likely to prevent bosses of high magical attack from one-shotting your party with a single move. The second difference is harder to pick up on, but I'd argue is much more important. If a character defeats an enemy, yet another character that has yet to move has also targeted that enemy, that character will defend. A lot of people seem to dislike this feature, but frankly, I kinda love it. It makes battles less mindless as you keep in mind which monsters have already taken damage, so you never waste turns. And on a final note, monsters rarely, if ever, appear in rooms with big puzzles in them, which is just really good design in general. After a few rooms of this, you come across a dead end, and Kraden asks you to find a hidden passage somewhere. Finding this secret is not difficult, however it teaches the player that the secrets and hidden passages are a thing in this game. The real interesting part is when you reach the next roadblock of the area. Kraden once again asks you to look for a hidden way further, however suggests that you try using your magic this time around. This is because these movable statues actually can't be reached from across this body of water. This is when you discover one of the most defining aspects of this entire series, using your magic as a way to solve puzzles. On top of the normal spells you get that you can use in battle, there are also a variety of abilities that are to be used in the overworld and have various effects. These effects can vary greatly, doing anything from making it rain, to creating tornadoes to blow leaves away, to mind reading, to becoming sand. There's a lot of interesting and unique effects here, and understanding how they work with each other and the environment is paramount to completing any of these games. The synergy you need to use here is probably one of the most common ones you'll use in the game: move. I actually really like that they give you this one in particular to start because moving statues is something you've already done. As a result, giving you a magic that does what you just did but better reinforces that magic is truly an extension of your natural moveset in this game. It's something you're going to have to get used to using all of the time, and this room introduces that in a non-intrusive way. After trekking further through the dungeon, you will come across a new room of a color palette we have never seen before. You know this is going to be special. Kraden believes that we are extremely close to discovering the core of Sol Sanctum, the origin of all alchemy. I've always really liked this scene in particular because it shows a side of Kraden you haven't really seen yet. You can tell he's eager to discover the truth of this dungeon, reckless even. And he gets very... Oh, I actually forgot about that heart emote. I think that's one of the few times you ever see that in the series. Actually, I think this might actually be a good transition into talking about a very small detail about this game that gives it a lot of personality. During gameplay, you might notice that the actual character sprites of Golden Sun are very rigid. They're quite simple once you actually zoom in on them, and so you'd assume they don't have the ability to emote much. However, the devs have still found a way to make characters expressive. Throughout cutscenes, you might notice that characters bounce, fidget, blink, turn, use these emote bubbles, the list goes on. Despite the very basic character sprites for Isaac and his friends, Golden Sun has a lot of these small tricks to make characters in cutscenes more visually interesting. I like to tell a small story. Golden Sun was a game I grew up with, and I was extremely young when I did. Like, really young. So young, in fact, that I was still learning how to read. I was about 7 or 8 at the time. I had a very difficult time understanding the story of this game as a result because of how text-heavy it was. But you know what? How often characters emoted actually helped me understand it better. This is why, while it may seem just like a bunch of small details, these simple additions make cutscenes a lot more dynamic and easier to understand. No one in this game is just a static sprite, there's commonly movement, so on top of just looking nice, this also helps from a readability perspective as well. So anyway, after your party visits this room, Kraden instructs you to go a bit farther. This is when you come across somewhat of a trap that causes the room to temporarily go haywire, leading everyone to believe that this is how the storm 3 years ago started. This suggests that Satoris and Minardi were able to make it this far, but hit this roadblock, triggering the volcano. After experimenting around and conveniently needing a very clever use of your move synergy, you sort of disarm the trap and then are able to make a breakthrough. It creates this portal, you enter it, and this is when things start to get really interesting. You know how a lot of RPGs have their vague, abstract dungeon right at the end? Well, Golden Sun opts to put it at the very beginning instead. We find ourselves in a rocky terrain surrounded by water. Kraden questions if this is all the ocean, which leads to a line that caught me quite off guard as a kid. Garrett doesn't know what the ocean is. This was very strange to me personally as a kid because, well, as someone from Maine, the idea of a person who has never seen the ocean before is somewhat of an enigma to me. It made me more invested in his character somehow, with a nice payoff as later in the game Garrett actually does get to see the ocean for the first time. Anyway, Kraden sees at each of the four corners of the room the fabled elemental stars. These are the glorified MacGuffins of the game, being as there's only one for every element and each one has unlimited power. Frankly though, I really enjoy how they're handled here. Typically in an RPG, a driving force for the protagonist would be to collect a series of stones or jewels or some otherwise magical artifacts. These items would have deep lore ties with the world and be required to defeat the true antagonist. Golden Sun's take on these items is unique, however. Firstly, instead of finding them periodically throughout the game, you're given them all right at the very beginning. Secondly, the journey isn't really about finding these artifacts, it's more about depositing them. People who have played these games before know what I'm talking about. Kraden brings out those 4 silver sacks he collected at the start of the game and gives them to Isaac while instructing him to go collect the 4 stars. After admittedly one of the most needlessly long segments of the entire intro, the game then throws a curveball. Satoros and Minardi have been following you this entire time, accompanied now by this strange man in a green and blue mask. These 3 take Kraden and Jenna hostage. In exchange for their safety, they want the 4 elemental stars you've been collecting. Everyone on your side refuses to give them up, since there's no guarantee Satoros and Minardi will keep their word. So in response, they demand the man with the mask remove his disguise. This leads to probably the first major plot twist of the game. The man removes his mask to reveal none other than Felix. We all thought he died 3 years ago, when in reality Satoros and Minardi found him and started raising him as sort of an apprentice. Although they don't talk much about that here. You know, I love how this game does illusion of choice. You can still refuse to give Satoros and Minardi the stars, but if you do, Garrett just takes them from you and delivers them himself. On the way, however, he meets one final character, Alex, a mysterious watercaster who was with the group for ambiguous reasons. At this point, they only have 3 stars, however, so they force you to go grab the last one as well. As you do, however, the entire cavern starts to break apart. Load-bearing areas are pretty common in these sorts of games, however, once again, Golden Sun makes it feel just a little bit more unique than normal. Firstly, it's typically defeating a boss that causes the dungeon to start collapsing, whereas here it's removing the artifact that gave life to the dungeon itself. Secondly, on top of the typical shaking effect you get with these sorts of sequences, the entire ocean evaporated as well. Whoops. Almost immediately, the group then notices a floating rock of an eyeball that appeared out of seemingly nowhere. They come to the conclusion that it must be the Wise One, an ancient guardian of the elemental stars. Alex claims that the Guardian is way too powerful for them, and that, for now, they should retreat. So the villains decide to leave at this point, taking the hostages with them. This leaves Isaac and Garrett all alone in the crumbling chamber. I'm sorry, I've just always liked that visual. So, now what? Most of the stars are gone, the 2 boys are trapped in a collapsing chamber, and they now have this mysterious monster to deal with. This looks like it could be the end, but of course, that'd be a pretty short game, wouldn't it? You know, they handle the Wise One really well in my opinion. The short man up to this point you get gets you into the mindset that this is going to be something you'll need to fight, like it's the first proper boss of the game or something. However, instead it starts talking with you, is very calm, and even takes your side to a certain extent. The Wise One is able to keep the 2 safe for a short period of time, all while giving them a mission. Throughout the world there are 4 enchanted lighthouses, one for each element. Tossing the respective star into a lighthouse will light it, and the Wise One wants you to prevent this. Satoros and Minardi seem to be planning to light these locations, and this is a problem because when all 4 lighthouses are lit, the power of alchemy is released. And when this happens, well, the Wise One doesn't actually go into too much detail about this. He just claims that it can be dangerous. Isaac and Garrett decide to take his word. After that, he warps you out of the chamber. Now all you have to do is escape the mountain. As you escape, you notice that everyone is already there, curious about what exactly happened. Your families are there and everything. This leads to Isaac and Garrett getting caught and called into the nearby church in order to discuss what exactly occurred on the mountain. Isaac and Garrett explain everything, using one of those fun charade sections you sometimes see in these games. I've always loved it when games do this. It's a convenient way to convey that plot is being explained without needing to repeat dialogue. While this goes on, however, the head priest receives a vision from none other than the Wise One himself, and is basically told the exact same thing he told you the two heroes. That the dangerous power of alchemy will be released if all 4 lighthouses are lit, and that he wants specifically Isaac and Garrett to prevent this. Now, at this point, the game actually throws kind of a funny curveball at you. You're asked if you want to embark on this adventure. You instinctively hit yes. However, if you say no and then leave the building, you get this. And so the world began drifting towards its fated destruction. Game over, basically. Yeah, you can refuse to save the world and get a game over as a result. A very small attention to detail, yeah, but a pretty amusing one, admittedly. When you eventually select yes, you receive a vision from the Wise One himself. You are then told to seek out the Djinn, which is a major mechanic to this game that's explained later, and everyone decides that tomorrow would be the best time to head out. And then they head off for the night. Your journey is about to begin. The next morning, we begin the next scene of a boy and a girl wondering what's going on by the gate, and lo and behold, everyone is sending off Isaac and Garrett. The scene itself is actually really touching. The only person who does not show up is Isaac's mother, Dora, and the reasoning they give is very realistic. She doesn't want to see her son leave. After losing her husband 3 years ago, she is very emotional given the situation. Fun fact, you can actually return to Vale later in the adventure, and if you do, you'll learn that Dora has grown sick with worry and anxiety, which emphasizes just how much this affects her. It's very realistic. She does have something to give you, however, as one of Garrett's relatives gives Isaac a gift on her behalf. It's the Catch Beads, an item that will allow you to cast that magic you actually saw her use in the intro. It's a really nice way to bookend this entire introduction. Afterwards, everyone wishes you farewell and you exit the town into the world map of Golden Sun. And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is the intro to the game. At this point, the game starts proper, starting with this little guy down here who I won't really talk about now, but rest assured, he's pretty awesome. Alright, at this point, I think we've officially discussed the entire intro. I would love to hear someone make the argument that Vault's Thieves or the entirety of Kalima should be considered here as well. In all seriousness though, I originally started this 2-part to discuss how I personally believe that Golden Sun has one of the best intros in RPG history, and to be frank, even with the second half, which I didn't think I was going to tack on at first, I still think it holds up. The first part of the intro is about 15 minutes in length and conveys just about everything you would need to know to get started. The second video, however, goes on for about an hour longer. Now, I have played this game a lot, so let's just play it safe and say that in total, the entire introduction is about an hour and a half long. Is that still good, though? Well, it's certainly a lot shorter than games such as Final Fantasy VIII or especially Kingdom Hearts 2, but to be frank, I still don't consider it that bad. It's still pretty concise, all things considered, and a lot of the quote-unquote filler is a well-designed dungeon, except for this part, so you know what? I still think it's pretty good. So, yeah, there we go. Thanks for coming along on this little journey as we go through the intro of Golden Sun. Now, I'd like to apologize for this video taking so long. I actually wanted to originally release this in February, however, I've been really busy with other things, and I'm just now getting around to finishing it up. I hope you folks enjoyed this duology of videos, and as always, if you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a like or a comment. I always enjoy furthering the conversation here. And as always, thanks for watching.